Marjane Satrapi was born on November 22, 1969, in Rasht, Iran, in a family with a progressive ideology. After the difficult political situation prevailing in the country in the years after the 1980 revolution, she was sent to Vienna to continue her secondary studies. Back in Iran, she enrolled in fine arts at the University of Tehran, obtaining a master's degree in visual communication. In 1994, she moved to France, where she still resides today. She also studied decorative arts. Although her initial vocation was to be a graphic artist, from 1997 she likes to be dedicated on illustrating storybooks for children. In a world with so few women cartoonists as is in the comic, and a country dominated by men's power like Iran, the appearance of an author with a rebellious spirit makes Marjane Satrapi a unique character. About the main topic of this story, Persepolis is the autobiographical story of the Iranian Marjane Satrapi, the story of how she grew up in an Islamic fundamentalist regime that would eventually lead her to leave her country. The comic begins in 1979, when Marjane is 10 years old, and from her childhood perspective, she would witnesses a social and political change that ends more than 50 years of the reign of the Shah of Persia in Iran, and gives way to an Islamic republic. Marjane Satrapi grew up in Iran just as things started getting bad. Students were segregated by gender lines, women's rights receded faster than the polar ice caps, and family members were executed simply because they were suspected to be spies. It's a rough time to grow up there, to say the least, but Marjane not only survives protests and bombings, she moves to Vienna, then back to Iran, and then manages to leave again. To sum up, Persepolis shows us the danger of letting the opinions of very few dictate the behavior of many. Marjane's school is segregated by gender, and she is forced to wear a veil. Young Marjane learns that her grandfather was a prince who was imprisoned and tortured. Her uncle Anush is freed during one regime change, but he ended up recaptured and executed later. Iraq invades Iran and bombs them regularly. Marjane's neighbor's building is destroyed. Realizing that if her neighbor can die, she can too, Margie decides she has nothing to fear. She mouths off at school and eventually gets expelled. Her parents decide that Margie is too independent and intelligent, so they send her to be educated in Vienna. In Vienna, Marjane has trouble acclimating. The culture is just too so different. Marjane experiments with sex, drugs, finding and losing them. She also lives in a variety of different apartments. Eventually, she becomes so homesick that she gets super depressed and starts sleeping on the streets. This causes her to go from homesick to just sick, and she almost died. This near-death experience is a wake-up call which sends Marjane back to her support system, her family in Iran. She's glad with her family, but giving up her freedom kind of sucks. She also doesn't want to admit what a hard time she had in Vienna, so she gets more depressed and tries to kill herself. Believing she was saved by God, Marjane tries living her own life once again. She becomes more outspoken, she gets married, and then, when it feels right, she gets divorced. However, she does find her identity, and her identity is not compatible with living under the oppressive Iranian regime. Marjane returns to Western Europe and never lives in Iran again. About the main characters of the story, we have Marjane is the novel's main character. The book is a narrative of her life since she was 10 years old. She provides the childhood perspective from which the historical events of the novel are understood. Mr. Satrapi is Marjane's father. He is a leftist political protester that takes part in the demonstrations of 1979. Yet, he is also an established engineer and maintains a middle-class lifestyle. Mrs. Satrapi is Marjane's mother. She holds leftist political views and often urges Marjane and her friends to rely on education as a way to further themselves and their country. Anush is Marjane's uncle. He was imprisoned by the Shah for his communist views, but was released after the revolution. He had been married in Russia, but his wife divorced him. Anush is arrested by the Islamic regime and executed on the false charge that he is a Russian spy. Marjane's grandmother lives with Marjane's family for a while. Her husband had been a prince of the Shah and had been made prime minister. He had been arrested for conspiring with communists and tortured in a water cell. Her grandmother provides Marjane with a matriarchal figure. Siamak is a hero of the revolution. He had been captured and tortured by Shah's police and had been released after the revolution. The Islamic regime also seeks to capture him and they kill his sister in the process. Siamak escapes Iran by hiding in a group of sheep being transported across the border. Mohsen is a hero of the revolution and a friend of Marjane's family. Mohsen had been captured and tortured by the Shah's forces. He is murdered by the new Islamic regime by being drowned in a bathtub. The regime frames his death as a suicide. Mary is Marjane's nanny and maid. She was taken in by the satrapies as a young child because her impoverished family couldn't support her. Mary falls in love with a neighborhood boy, but she cannot be with him because she is from a lower social class than he is. Mali is a close friend of the satrap's family. She comes to live with them for a while after their border town is bombed by Iraqi forces. She and her husband had been wealthy, and the work portrays them as quite materialistic, but they lost everything in the bombing.